Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, when I get excerpts from the Quran, I always get a little nervous. There's just so much depth there, and this time is no different. You've given us some fascinating sections from chapter 33, the Confederates.
Yeah.
It's one that speaks to both our hearts and our heads.
Right.
It deals with a specific event, but it also prompts some really deep reflection on the human condition.
Yeah, it definitely does. This chapter really throws us into a pivotal moment in Islamic history, the Battle of the Trench, and then uses that as a springboard to explore universal truths about faith and hypocrisy and leadership.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. Okay, so let's set the stage. Picture Medina, the Prophet Muhammad's city.
Okay.
Surrounded by this massive coalition of tribes known as the Confederates, right? Outnumbered, facing incredible danger.
Yeah.
You can just feel the tension, can't you?
Oh, the stakes couldn't have been higher, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet, instead of panicking, the Muslims, led by the Prophet, took a surprisingly innovative approach to defense. They dug a trench.
A trench? Like in the ground?
Yeah.
It seems almost too simple.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the brilliance of it, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Confederates were completely caught off guard. They were expecting a traditional battlefield.
Right.
Not this defensive barrier. And the trench, combined with a fierce storm that hit, it really demoralized them.
So they were literally and figuratively weathered down, huh? I love that. I love how this one event is just layered with meaning.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't just clever tactics that saved the day, right?
Right.
Divine intervention plays a role, too.
Oh, absolutely. Verse 9 specifically describes Allah sending a wind and unseen forces to aid the Muslims.
Wow.
It's a powerful reminder that even when things look bleak, there's a force greater than ourselves that can intervene.
Okay, so that's the historical backdrop. But this chapter isn't just a war story. It really digs into the internal struggles people faced during this crisis. And that's where things get really interesting for me.
Absolutely. We see this stark contrast between those who remain steadfast in their faith, even when everything's on the line, and those who just crumble under pressure, the hypocrites.
You know, when you say hypocrites, I immediately think of those folks on social media who preach one thing but act totally differently offline. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
That's a great modern analogy. It's about that gap between words and actions, between outward displays of faith and genuine inner conviction. Verse 11 really captures the intensity of this internal struggle. It says, "There and then the believers were tested and were shaken most severely."
So it's like true belief isn't about saying the right things when it's easy. It's about holding on to that faith even when you're terrified, when everything's falling apart around you.
Exactly. And those who couldn't handle that pressure, those who were more concerned with saving their own skin than standing with their community, their hypocrisy is laid bare in verses 12-14. They're making excuses, trying to dodge the fight, even when it means abandoning their people.
It's so human, isn't it? That instinct to protect ourselves, even if it means compromising our values. You know, it makes me think about those times when I've taken the easy way out, even when I knew it wasn't the right thing to do.
We all have those moments, right?
Yeah.
And this chapter is really pushing us to examine those choices, to confront that hypocrisy within ourselves. But it also offers guidance, showing us what true leadership looks like in the face of adversity.
And that's where the Prophet Muhammad comes in, right? He's portrayed as this model of unwavering faith and courage, even in the most dire circumstances.
Verse 3 lays it out so clearly. It says, "And put your trust in Allah. Allah is enough as a trustee." The Prophet embodies this complete reliance on a higher power, leading with wisdom and strength, even when surrounded by enemies.
Okay, so we've got faith, hypocrisy, leadership, and then things take a turn to some pretty serious social commentary.
Right, we move from the battlefield to the intricacies of family and social dynamics.
Yeah.
Verse 4, for example, clarifies the distinction between adopted sons and biological sons, which was a major social reform at the time.
So it's about establishing clear guidelines for inheritance and family relationships, ensuring fairness and preventing disputes.
Precisely. It's like laying down the law, so to speak, to protect everyone's rights.
And speaking of families, there's this intriguing part about the Prophet's wives, describing them as mothers to the believers.
Right.
What's the significance of that?
It highlights their special status within the community. They weren't just wives, they were seen as spiritual guides and role models for all Muslims.
Okay, now this is where I need a little more unpacking.
Yeah.
Because when we think about the role of women in Islam, There are often a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to delve into this chapter with nuance and sensitivity. We can't just impose our modern perspectives onto a text that was revealed centuries ago.
Right.
In a very different social context.
So help me understand. These verses about the prophet's wives, what are they really saying?
Okay.
And how do they fit into the broader picture of women's roles in Islam?
Well, firstly, it's important to remember that these verses are specific to the prophet's wives who held a unique position in the community. They weren't just responsible for their households, they were also involved in teaching, providing spiritual guidance, and even mediating disputes. They played a vital role in the spread of Islam.
So it wasn't about restricting their freedom or confining them to the domestic sphere. They were active participants in public life.
Exactly. But their public roles also came with certain expectations and responsibilities, which are reflected in the guidelines outlined in this chapter. For example, there are verses that address the etiquette of visiting the prophet's home, emphasizing the importance of respecting his privacy and the sanctity of his household.
So it's about establishing boundaries, even for those closest to the prophet. It's like saying, hey, even the prophet needs his space sometimes.
Exactly. It's a reminder that everyone, regardless of their status, deserves to have their personal boundaries respected. And this respect extends beyond the prophet's household. It's a general principle that applies to all social interactions.
This is making me think about those times when I've overstepped boundaries, maybe lingered too long at someone's house, or shared something I shouldn't have.
Oh, we've all been there.
Yeah.
It's human nature to sometimes miss those social cues or get caught up in the moment.
Right.
But this chapter is reminding us to be mindful, to think about the impact our actions have on others.
Okay, so boundaries are important. What else jumps out at you when we're thinking about these social dynamics?
Well, there are also verses in chapter 33 that address the issue of modesty and the importance of avoiding behavior that could lead to gossip or harassment.
These are the verses that often get misinterpreted as being oppressive towards women.
Unfortunately, yes. But it's crucial to remember the historical context.
Right.
These verses were revealed in a society where women were often vulnerable to slander and exploitation. So the guidelines about dress and behavior were likely intended to protect them, to create a safer environment.
It's about shifting the focus from restriction to protection. It's about creating a community where everyone feels safe and respected.
Yeah.
And that's a message that resonates even today, right?
Absolutely. We still live in a world where women are often subjected to harassment and judgment based on their appearance. So the message of these verses, while expressed in a language specific to that time and place, still speaks to the need for respect, boundaries, and a commitment to creating a just and equitable society.
Okay, so we've gone from a literal battlefield to this nuanced discussion about social dynamics and women's roles in Islam.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much ground this chapter covers. But there's one verse in particular that really blew my mind when I first read it.
You're talking about verse 72, the verse about the trust, aren't you?
Yes. That one gave me chills. It feels like this epic cosmic drama.
Right.
And it really gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
It definitely does. I mean, imagine this. Allah offers this immense responsibility, this trust to heavens, the earth, the mountains, these powerful, seemingly unshakable forces. And they're like, nope, too much for us. We can't handle that.
It's like they're acknowledging their own limitations.
Right.
Recognizing the gravity of this responsibility.
Yeah.
And then comes the human being, flawed and fragile as we are, and we're like, sure, yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah, we got this.
It's almost like we're too ignorant to understand the weight of what we're accepting, right? Like we're biting off more than we can chew.
The verse describes us as unfair and ignorant, which suggests that we often misuse this incredible gift, this freedom and responsibility that we've been given.
So what exactly is this trust? What are we agreeing to?
There are many interpretations, but a common one is that the trust refers to free will, our ability to choose between good and evil. We're given this incredible power to shape our lives and impact the world around us, but we also have the capacity to mess things up royally.
It's like we're handed this divine toolbox, but we often use it to build things that fall apart or even cause harm. It's both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
And that duality is at the heart of the human experience. We have the potential for incredible good, but also for profound destruction. And verse 72 doesn't shy away from that complexity.
Right.
It acknowledges our flaws while also hinting at our capacity for greatness.
So it's not a condemnation.
Yeah.
It's more like a challenge.
I think so, yeah.
It's like Allah is saying, okay, humans, you wanted this freedom, you wanted this responsibility, now show me what you can do with it.
Exactly. And that challenge isn't just about individual salvation, it's about our collective impact on the world.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our choices have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for those around us.
Right.
And for generations to come.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? It makes you really examine your own life, your choices, the impact you're having on the world.
It does. It pushes us to confront our own shortcomings, but also to recognize the incredible potential within each of us.
You know, what I find so powerful about this verse is that it doesn't end on a note of despair. Yes, we mess up. We're flawed. But there's also this implicit hope, this belief that we can learn and grow and ultimately live up to the responsibility of the trust.
It's like we're being given a second chance, over and over again. Every moment is an opportunity to choose differently, to act with greater awareness, to align our will with a higher purpose.
This is why I love these deep dives.
Me too.
We start with this epic battle, and somehow we end up pondering the very essence of what it means to be human.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It is.
History, spirituality, our personal struggles, those big questions about meaning and purpose. It's all woven together in this intricate tapestry.
I think we've given our listener a lot to chew on in this first part, but there's so much more to uncover in chapter 33.
We're just getting started. There are layers upon layers here waiting to be explored.
So, dear listener, while we take a breath, we invite you to do the same. Reflect on what's resonated with you so far. What questions are bubbling up? Hold on to those, because we'll be diving deeper into the wisdom of chapter 33 in the next part of this deep dive.
All right, picking up where we left off, one thing that's really been swirling in my mind is this whole idea of the trust. It's such a weighty concept, you know? It makes you realize how much is riding on our choices, even seemingly small ones.
Oh, I know, right? It's both empowering and kind of terrifying at the same time. It's like every decision we make is contributing to this grand cosmic tapestry, for better or for worse.
No pressure, right?
No pressure at all. But speaking of pressure, I think it's interesting how this chapter goes from that cosmic scale right back down to the nitty-gritty of human behavior, especially hypocrisy.
Oh, right. Right, we touched on that earlier.
Yeah.
How those who claimed faith but crumbled under pressure were exposed. It's easy to judge them, but I think we've all got a bit of that hypocrisy in us, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Verse 19 paints a pretty vivid picture of the hypocrite. Stingy, cowardly, quick to criticize. It's almost like a checklist. And the thing is, these qualities aren't limited to a specific time or place. They're timeless human flaws. It's like those people who post all these inspirational quotes online, but then you see them being rude to a waiter or cutting someone off in traffic. It's that disconnect between what we say and what we do that really gets me.
That's such a perfect example, and that's exactly what this chapter is calling us out on. It's not enough to talk the talk. We have to walk the walk, to align our actions with our beliefs, even when it's hard.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
How do we overcome that hypocrisy within ourselves? It feels like this constant battle.
It is a battle, and this chapter gives us some powerful tools for fighting it. One is self-awareness. The Quran encourages us to be mindful of our thoughts and intentions, to really examine our motives before we act.
So it's like taking a pause, asking ourselves, why am I doing this? Is it for the right reasons? Or am I just trying to look good or impress someone or avoid discomfort?
Exactly. It's that honest self-reflection that can help us identify those moments where we're falling short, where our actions aren't matching up with our values. And the key here is it's not about being perfect, right? We're all going to mess up. To give in to those selfish impulses sometimes, it's about recognizing those missteps and striving to do better next time.
It's like that idea of repentance, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging our mistakes and committing to making amends. But chapter 33 isn't all about confronting our shortcomings. There's also this beautiful message about trust in Allah, particularly when things get tough.
Oh, absolutely. Verse 17 really stuck with me. It says, say, who is it who will shield you from Allah if he intends adversity for you or intends mercy for you? Besides Allah, they will find for themselves neither friend nor helper.
It's a powerful reminder that even when we feel alone, even when things are falling apart, there's a force greater than ourselves that we can rely on.
And that reliance, that surrender to a higher power can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to let go of that need for control, that constant worrying and planning, and just trust that things will unfold as they should.
I think about that a lot, especially when I'm facing a difficult decision or feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. It's like saying, okay, Allah, I'm doing my best, but I trust that you've got this.
It's a practice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Learning to surrender that control.
Yeah.
But the rewards are immense. There's a peace and a tranquility that comes with knowing that you're not alone in this journey.
So we've got self-reflection, trust in Allah, and then this chapter throws in some social etiquette tips too.
It's like a guide to living a righteous life, both inwardly and outwardly.
Right, like verse 53, which talks about the etiquette of visiting the prophet's home.
Right, it emphasizes respecting boundaries, not overstaying your welcome. And I think it's interesting because even the prophet, who is deeply loved and revered, still needed his space. It highlights that everyone, regardless of their status, needs time for solitude, for reflection.
It's like a gentle reminder to those overly enthusiastic guests who linger long after the party's over. We've all encountered them.
I think we've all been that guest at some point too. But it goes beyond just physical space. It's about being mindful of other people's time, their emotional energy, not overwhelming them with our own needs.
So it's about reading those social cues, respecting those unspoken boundaries. That makes me think of those friends who are constantly calling for advice or needing to vent, but never seem to reciprocate.
Oh, yeah.
It can be draining.
Exactly. This chapter is prompting us to be more aware of those dynamics, to strive for balance in our relationships.
Speaking of balance, I can't help but think about those verses about modesty, the ones that are often misinterpreted as being restrictive toward women. I'm curious to hear your take on those.
They're definitely some of the most debated verses in the Quran, and it's important to approach them with sensitivity and a deep understanding of the historical context.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
What are these verses actually saying?
Well, they primarily address the wives of the prophet, instructing them to dress and behave in a way that distinguishes them from other women and protects them from harassment or slander. Remember, this was a society where women were often viewed as possessions, vulnerable to exploitation and false accusations.
So it's about creating a protective boundary, shielding them from the harsh realities of a patriarchal society.
Exactly. And it's important to note that these verses aren't meant to be applied universally to all women. They're specifically directed at the prophet's wives, who held a unique position of authority and influence within the community.
So it's not about restricting women's freedom or dictating how they should dress, but rather about acknowledging the specific challenges they faced in that particular time and place.
Exactly. It's about understanding the historical context, the social dynamics at play, and the underlying intention behind these guidelines.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these verses have been used to justify oppressive practices towards women in some cultures.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial to have these nuanced conversations, to challenge those misinterpretations, and to reclaim the true spirit of these teachings, which is about justice, equality, and respect for all.
So how do we reconcile these verses with modern ideas of gender equality?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that the Quran is a living text. It's not a static set of rules, but rather a source of guidance that can be reinterpreted and applied in different contexts.
So it's about evolving our understanding of these teachings as we progress as a society.
Exactly. It's about challenging cultural norms that contradict the core values of Islam, which include justice, compassion, and respect for all human beings, regardless of gender.
It's like we can appreciate the wisdom of these verses while also acknowledging that our understanding of gender roles and women's rights has evolved significantly since the time of the Prophet.
And that evolution is ongoing. It's our responsibility to continue having these conversations, to challenge harmful interpretations, and to strive for a more just and equitable world for all.
Okay, so we've talked about boundaries, modesty, and the complexities of interpreting these verses in a modern context. But there's one more theme in chapter 33 that really stands out to me: truthfulness.
It's one of the cornerstones of Islam, isn't it? The foundation of trust and integrity.
Exactly. Verse 24 states that Allah will reward the truthful for their truthfulness. It's such a simple statement, but it carries so much weight.
It really does. And it's not just about being honest with others, it's about being honest with ourselves. It's about living authentically, aligning our words with our actions, and striving to be true to our values.
You know, I think this emphasis on truthfulness is more relevant than ever in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with misinformation and fake news.
It's like we're living in a post-truth era where it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern fact from fiction.
And that's where this verse comes in, reminding us of the importance of seeking truth, speaking truth, and standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. It's about having the courage to challenge falsehood, to hold ourselves and others accountable.
It's about reclaiming the power of honesty and integrity, both in our personal lives and in our communities.
As we're talking about all these themes, hypocrisy, trust, boundaries, modesty, truthfulness, it strikes me how relevant this ancient text is to our modern lives. It's like these verses are offering a blueprint for building strong, ethical communities.
It's a timeless blueprint, isn't it? It's about fostering those values of respect, compassion, and justice that transcend cultural differences and speak to the core of what it means to be human.
And that's the beauty of the deep dives, isn't it?
Yeah.
We get to explore these ancient texts, unpack their wisdom, and discover their relevance to our lives today.
It's an incredible journey, and we're not done yet. There's still so much to uncover in chapter 33.
Exactly. But before we go any further, I think it's time to pause and let our listener reflect on what we've discussed so far.
Take a moment to consider what resonates with you. What stands out? What questions are you grappling with? We'll be back with the final part of our deep dive into chapter 33, so hold on to those thoughts and be ready to explore even deeper.
Okay, so I've been doing some thinking, and something that's really been bugging me about this whole chapter 33. We've talked about the epic battles and the hypocrisy and the social dynamics, even that cosmic drama of the trust. But it all seems to revolve around men. Where are the women's voices in all this?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one that scholars have been grappling with for centuries. It's true that at first glance, chapter 33 seems to focus primarily on men and their roles, particularly in the context of war and leadership.
Right. We hear about the prophet's strategic decisions and the men who stood firm in their faith, and even those who faltered. But what about the women who are experiencing this crisis right alongside them?
Right.
What were their stories?
Well, it's important to remember that the absence of explicit female voices in the chapter doesn't necessarily equate to their absence from the events themselves. The Quran often speaks in broad terms, addressing the community as a whole, but that doesn't mean women weren't actively involved in shaping the course of events.
So it's like reading between the lines, recognizing that women were present and influential, even if their stories aren't explicitly told.
Exactly. And when we look beyond the surface, we can find glimpses of women's contributions woven throughout this chapter. For example, we discuss the prophet's wives and their role as mothers of the believers.
Right.
That title alone suggests a level of authority and influence that extends far beyond the domestic sphere.
Right. They were involved in teaching, providing spiritual guidance, and even mediating disputes. They were really key players in building that early Muslim community.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget the women who fought alongside the men in the Battle of the Trench. There are historical accounts that describe women tending to the wounded, providing supplies, and even engaging in combat themselves.
Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea. It's like history has often overlooked or downplayed the contributions of women, even in really pivotal moments like this.
It's a common thread throughout history, unfortunately. But as we delve deeper into these texts and explore alternative historical narratives, we start to see a richer, more complete picture emerge.
So even though chapter 33 might not explicitly highlight women's voices, we can infer their presence, their strength, their contributions to the events unfolding.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us as modern readers to bring that awareness to our understanding of this chapter and the Quran as a whole. We have to challenge those traditional interpretations that have often marginalized women's voices and recognize the vital role they played in shaping Islamic history and thought.
It's like we're reclaiming those lost stories, those unsung heroes, and honoring their contributions. It's about rewriting history to be more inclusive and representative of the diverse experiences of those who lived it.
And that rewriting, that reinterpretation is an ongoing process. It requires us to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, and to approach these texts with an open mind and a willingness to learn from diverse perspectives.
This conversation is reminding me of something we discussed earlier, the idea of the trust. It's not just about men fulfilling their responsibilities. It's about all of humanity, men and women alike, stepping up and using our free will to create a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. The trust isn't gender specific. It's a universal call to action, a challenge for all of us to use our gifts, our talents, our opportunities to make a positive impact.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into chapter 33, I think we've uncovered so much more than just this historical account of a battle. We've explored the complexities of faith and the challenges of leadership, the nuances of social dynamics, and the profound responsibility that comes with being human.
We have, and we've only scratched the surface. There are layers upon layers of meaning within these verses waiting to be explored.
And that's the beauty of it, right? It's a journey of discovery. And each time we revisit these texts, we gain new insights, new perspectives, and a deeper appreciation for the wisdom they hold.
Absolutely.
So, dear listener, we encourage you to continue this exploration on your own. Reflect on what's resonated with you, grapple with the questions that have emerged, and see how the lessons of chapter 33 can guide you on your own journey. Until next time, keep diving.